Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulika al-Kareem. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahabihi ajma'een. Today, inshallah, we are going to look at a very special publication, the Quran Beheld. This is the 136th English translation of the Quran. And those who know that this work was in the making for the last 15 or more years, actually, were very excited to see the publication actually happening. And so it is with this great deal of expectation that this publication has been received. We are going to look at this translation in several sessions. And the first one is just the beginning of what is said in the introduction of the work. You should remember that this publication has come out almost 4 centuries after the first publication of the English translation by Alexander Ross. This is a terrible publication. This was one of the worst translations, well, the first translation, and it wasn't even from the Arabic. And he called it a newly Englished for the satisfaction of all that desire to look into the Turkish vanities. So he called the Quran Turkish vanities. And there is a reason for this, because the Ottomans, when they arrived in Vienna, it was an unsuccessful event, but they left such terror in the European mindset, in the European psyche of the Muslims, that henceforth people looked at Islam through the eyes of this invasion. So it was called Turkish Vanities. And the second translation that came out from the Arabic wasn't even much better. George Sale, he produced it almost a century after Alexander Ross, 1734. And then we have several others. This is before the 19th century, or before the 20th century. And it's only in the 20th century that Muslims started to produce translations, English translations of the Quran. And therefore, this 136th translation, English translation of the Quran, is of special importance because number one, it will be viewed within the context and within the history of translations of the Quran in English language. In the 20th century, there have been 60 translations, and just in the first 17 years of the 21st centuries, we have 46 translations. And this information comes from this work by Bruce Lawrence, The Quran in English, a biography. It's not a very good work. It's not even accurate. It doesn't even list the very first English translation in the 20th century by Muslims. But nevertheless, this is an approximate number, 136 translations. We are told that this work has come into existence through a very special process, which involved Sheikh Ali Hani and Nuh Hamim Keller. For the first 7 years, Sheikh Ali explained every single word of the Quran based on the tafsirs. And after 7 years, when one would have expected the English translation to be compiled and put together, we are told that Nuh Hamim Keller realized that during this process, the ability of Sheikh Ali had increased to such an extent, and his own understanding had increased to such an extent that it would be worthwhile to repeat the whole process. So the initial translation was set aside, and for the next 8 long years, they went over every single word one more time, and this is how this work came into existence. Now, the first question that arises in reader's mind, of course, is if this is the process, then whose work is this? Is this the work of Sheikh Ali Hani, or is it the work of Nuha Mim Kaller? And if it's a combined joint effort, then wouldn't it be better to have Sheikh Ali's name on the very title as well, instead of a small print mention inside the text? But that's something, and it is important to know, because there are who is going to be responsible for what is being said. So that part needs to be fully understood. I see that. Let me just move this thing out of the way, so that one can see the slides. The next phase that we are told about is that after the translation had been published, Nuh Kaller's wife compared it with six of the best previous translations. And that comparison brought out what we are told, certain aspect of the meanings in Arabic which were not considered by any of the previous translators. And these six translations which are not identified are said to be the best among the previous translations, which means 135 previous translations. We are told that this was further verified by Nuh Kaller through asking Professor Ahmad Khan, who is at the American University in Cairo, and who was preparing an article for journal publication on the previous translations of the Quran. And he also confirmed that the entire collection of previous translations is inferior to this translation because they had missed certain aspects of the Quran, of the Arabic of the Quran, and this is the first time in the 400-year history of English translations that we have a translation that pays attention to these aspects of the Arabic of the Quran. This is a very big claim, to say the least. And this claim is being made on the authority of translator's wife and Professor Ahmad. There is no documented evidence of the scholarly accomplishments of the translator's wife. And if you go on the website of the American University of Cairo, Professor Ahmad is said to be someone who specializes in 4 areas: heresy and orthodoxy in medieval Islam, the early Islamic empire, classical Islamic sciences, and print in the Islamic world. Now, none of these come close to the Quran itself or the English translations of the Quran. So we are left with 2 statements about the superiority. This translation is superior to the existing translations because translator's wife claims that, and Professor Ahmed claims that, and both of them are not known to be the scholars in the field of Quran translations. However, substantially, the claim of superiority of the Quran Beheld rests on matters of Arabic meaning in the Quran that no previous English translation has seriously incorporated. Unquote, page 14 of the introduction. What does matters of Arabic meaning mean? Perhaps what is meant here is the nuanced aspects of Arabic language, and Allah knows best. But let's look at what is being said. We are told that the number of meanings, has uncovered matters of Arabic meaning in the Quran that no previous English translation has seriously incorporated. We now turn for brevity to just 7 of the most significant to show their importance in understanding the original text. As we all know, in the encyclopedic work on the sciences of the Quran, Jalaluddin Suyuti has actually devoted a whole chapter, his 40th chapter of the work, wherein he lists 80 matters, if we can use that term, matters of Arabic meaning, whatever that means, not 7, as even like 7 is not, it's just an ad hoc number. But nevertheless, the first one that we are told is summa. Now, we are told that the first is the conjugative adverb summa, which invariably appears in past translations as and or the then, indicating the simple succession in time between what it cojoins. Whereas we are told that in the classical works on the language of the Quran, Summa is much more than that. So just to be briefly explaining what is being said here is that Summa in all previous translations has been translated as and or then. But it has more aspects than as and then, and this is the first translation that is incorporating those aspects. This is well known, like in our own tradition. Jalaluddin Suyuti himself, he says that ثلاثة أمور ثم حرف يقتضي ثلاثة أمور. The particle thumma, harf thumma, has 3 important matters, and there is khilaf, difference of opinion on all 3. The first one is sharing in the command, at-tashriku fil hukm. The second is wat-tartib, and the third is wal-muhla. Sharing in the command, sequential occurrence of something, and delay, wal-muhla. Meaning, when we say thumma, we say Ja'a Zaid thumma Amr. Zaid came and then Amr came. Meaning there is a sequential occurrence. One thing happens and then another thing happens. First of all, Nucala translates this into disparity. Disparity in time to express perpetuity, disparity in rank, tarahi, rutabi. Tarahi itself is mistransliterated, and disparity is perhaps not a very accurate translation of delay or sequential occurrence, because in most of the tafasirs, we do have mention of these, as is mentioned in the introduction here, but the reference that we are given is the excellent article of a contemporary scholar. And we are told to look into that article. That article is a very short article. It doesn't really give us the depth, But the question is, if people are referred to an Arabic text in a translation, for whom is this translation? People who cannot read Arabic, they would be reading this translation, then we are referred back to an Arabic text. Nevertheless, what is really important for us to see is the claim that no previous translation has paid attention to these aspects of the usage of thumma in the Quran. Let's take an example from Surah Taha, the 82nd verse of Surah Taha has وَإِنِّي لَغَفَّارٌ لِمَنْ تَابَ وَآمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا ثُمَّ اهْتَدَى. Now this adverb thumma here does not convey a sequential occurrence. وَإِنِّي لَغَفَّارٌ لِمَنْ تَابَ وَآمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا ثُمَّ اهْتَدَى. The translation, which is very well translated in this translation, then ever after remains firmly guided. And verily, I am ever forgiving to whoever repents and believes and works righteousness, then ever after remains firmly guided. Meaning, thumma here does not mean that first Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He is ever forgiving, then for the one who seeks, who repents, and then he does وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, and then he does the righteous deeds, ثُمَّ اهْتَدَى, and after doing that, he is guided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying that He is Ghaffar upon the one who repents and does the good deeds, and then he is guided. So which is very clear in the translation in the Quran Beheld, but the claim is that no other previous translation has incorporated this particular aspect of thumma, and this is the first time in 400 years that we have this. If we look at the previous translations, just random selection here, Muhammad Asad, who has other problems in his translation, but in this verse he says, thereafter keeps to the right path. Summa ihtada. We have Shakir saying, then continues to follow the right guidance. Mustafa Khattab then persists on true guidance. Abdul Hayy then remains guided. And the Riyabadi thereafter let himself remain guided. So the claim that these 6 matters of Arabic meaning that no previous translation has seriously incorporated is not accurate. We just saw it in one example. If we want to go into the other examples, other six matters of Arabic meaning, whatever that means, we find similar cases where many previous translations have taken into consideration what is being claimed here. Let's just take one more. The emphatic indefinite, according to Keller, has been uniformly rendered in previous translations the same way it is normally denoted in English. That is, by the decidedly unemphatic indefinite article a or an before them. The emphasis here is in the original of this quote. What is being said? That no previous translation has paid attention to the emphatic indefinite. Let's take an example from Surah Al-Ma'idah. This is the 31st ayah. And Allah sent a crow, a ghuraban, probing the earth to show him how to hide the shameful remains of his brother. Keller comments, quote, the word crow is indefinite, that is any sort of crow, while the earth is definite, namely the earth beneath our feet, which we all know, unquote. So just to be clear, what is being said here is that the primary meaning of the nakira, indefinite in Arabic, is not known. It is the opposite of the marifa, which is denoted by al. Missing this emphatic indefinite is probably the greatest single leak of meaning and nuance in prior English translation. This is the actual text in this work on page 17. Missing this emphatic indefinite is probably the greatest single leak of meaning and nuance in prior English translations. All seem to have made a false analogy between modern written Arabic, which no longer uses the indefinite for such purposes, and the Arabic of the Quran, which everywhere does. So it's hard to really grant even any kind of generosity. This is the text of this work, which was produced after 15 years, and it claims that no previous translation has done what it is doing. Let's, that's probably a typo. But regardless of that, let's just look at the claim once again. We are told that no previous translation has paid attention to the emphatic indefinite. Just take the same example in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Ayah 31. What do we have here? In this translation, if we look at the ayah of the itself, فَبَعَثَ اللَّهُ غُرَابًا يَبْحَثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ لِيُرِيَهُ كَيْفَ يُوَارِي سَوْآتَ أَخِيهِ. Keller translates fa as and, which actually eliminates the sequential characteristics of the Quranic narrative, because if we look at this whole narration here, this is the story of the two sons of Adam alayhi salam. One of them, they both offer their offering, and one's offering is accepted and the other's not accepted. So there is a sequential character to the narrative itself. By translating fa as and, that emphasis on sequential occurrence is taken away. Many other translators, they translate fa as then or thereupon. Thereupon. Now, the second thing is, Keller translates ba'asa as sent, just as most other translators do, but there are translators who actually use appointed. فَبَعَثَ اللَّهُ غُرَابًا. Now, yabhathu fil ard is translated as probing the earth. What does probing the earth mean? Especially in the case of a crow, probing the earth. The Rabadi and several others, they use scratching the earth. I'm not saying that those other translations don't have their own problems, like the study Quran. But the point being made is that the claim here that no other translation has paid attention to these matters is not factually accurate. Shameful remains of his brother is not in the original text. The original text simply says, Sauta Akhi. Sauta Akhihi, which is translated by many other translators as his brother's nakedness. Where is the shameful adjective in the text of the Quran itself? The other four matters of meaning, matters of Arabic meaning are similar. I don't want to go into the details, but the seventh matter that is mentioned here is not really a matter of Arabic meaning. Rather, this is this is not a matter of Arabic meaning, but the claim here is so huge. We are told all previous translations have an over-reliance on English-Arabic dictionaries, previous translators, or even biblical renderings. Subhanallah. This is a huge claim because we are making a judgment on 135 translations produced over a period of 4 centuries. Over-reliance on English-Arabic dictionaries, previous translators, or even biblical renderings. This is infactual, it's not correct. And the example given is of Jannah. The word Jannah, we are told that the Jannah in the verse, and we said, O Adam, dwell in peace, you and your wife, in the lush shaded grove of paradise, Al-Jannah. Does the word Jannah primarily signify a grove of trees whose shade is so dense it blocks out all sunlight? We are told a garden seldom reaches above chest level and hence does not bear the Quranic implications very well. So the point being made here is that all previous translations have used the word garden for Jannah, which is, number one, inaccurate because that's not what the Quranic meaning is. Number two, it's biblical. And instead, it should be lush, shaded grove of paradise. Now, we all know that garden means different things to different people in different places. Like in North America, when we say garden, people understand by that a small space behind in the backyard where you grow your vegetables. In England, it perhaps most often means a place full of flowers. In the Indian subcontinent, a garden means something totally different. And we use garden in the sense of an orchard, and where the trees can be as tall as 30 feet. So that doesn't really convey the concept. And if we look at the mufradat of Raghib al-Isfahani, we really look at, Raghib al-Isfahani is just an amazing scholar we have. And he tells us the root meaning is to hide something. And because Jannah appears 147 times in the Quran, and to translate it as lush grove in all cases would perhaps be an overstretch. So this is just the first of the several in-depth looks into this work, because it's important for us to place it within its context. It's important for us to look at the claims. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq and the ability to keep his book as the supreme loyalty. I understand this is maybe difficult for some people who have personal loyalties to the translators, but ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار رب اغفر وارحم أنت خير الراحمين يا الله أنت حليم كريم عظيم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, in the next session we will look at some other aspects of this translation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.